Okay, so yeah, good to see lots of people having some interest in this. Like Paul was saying, my name's Sheina. I'm one of the implementation managers. There's 3 of us at the moment, and I've got the social care remit. So I have a colleague who's the implementation manager for education. So she's working right across the education system. Joanna Brown and Maria Morgan, my other colleague, is working with the justice sector. So, and I'm going to mention some of the pilots that they are working in across those sectors. We had a former colleague in health, but she got another job, and we're managed by the Director of Operations of the Safeguarding Board, Helen McKenzie, and we have a project manager, Stephanie Hanlon, who's also working with councils and housing executive and some other additions to her job as well. So we're a small team, but we've been I suppose trying to work as quickly as possible and moving things and seeing what we can, but it does feel like we're still, on a journey very much. This is a long-term journey to becoming a trauma-informed Northern Ireland, which I suppose is our huge, high aim. And that means whatever the role you have is, or whatever organisation you work with. So this slide here is just, I suppose, keeping me right about what I hope to achieve in this seminar, and kind of setting a context, looking at the different sectors, doing a bit about the ACEs background and the underpinning of that, and then how that builds and can inform trauma sensitive practice throughout our organisations and across the whole system of all our intersecting and intercepting organisations. We also need to look at how we can mitigate against ACEs. We have a moral and we often have a professional duty to mitigate against them. And when we look at building resilience, I mean, that we're going to explore that word a little bit. It can be used quite lightly, I think, sometimes. We need to look at individuals and families, but we also need to look at communities, and also we need to look at ourselves, whether we're social care workers, whether we're social workers, whether we're educationalists, whether we're in the justice sector, and our own resilience as a workforce broadly has the same meaning, and we need to care for ourselves and be cared for. So I'm going to look at a little bit and briefly about what this means to social care and social work and what trauma sensitive practice means in those terms, but also about how we are trying to support organisations to change systems. We are part of EITP funding, which is transformation monies. So changing systems, we're constantly in flux, I think, in our worlds, and sometimes that we actually really need to change in lots of ways because so many parts of our system are not working particularly effectively, or we're under strain, under huge strain and huge pressure, and particularly at these current times. Towards the end of the presentation, there's slides that I won't talk to that are there for your information as well. So they are references, they are resources as well. So you see them at the end. So the project as a whole is set within the Safeguarding Board, and it's where the Department of Health decided to kind of give the monies to the Safeguarding Board due to the connections and the relationships and the memberships, the members of the Safeguarding Board. So the Safeguarding Board is 27 members. I'm not sure if they're all actually represented in this slide, but there are also many other associated organisations, and that can change, and I know there's some missing from that slide as well. So that might be people who, organisations who become involved in the core businesses of the Safeguarding Board, which might be about looking at case management reviews when something has gone very badly wrong for a child or children or a family. So that the management reviews, and some of you may well have taken part in them, have maybe chaired those meetings or have been part of working groups. The Safeguarding Board has also developed practice. There's papers been very recently published, and Jackie Montgomery Devlin did a presentation for NISC recently on child sexual exploitation. So there's always kind of special interest groups there as well. So as a project, being kind of housed and managed within the Safeguarding Board has been effective for us in terms of our links and setting up these links, even though we're kind of, we've got a broader base, and certainly we are looking at adverse childhood experiences and their potential impact and potential traumatizing impact across the lifespan. So this is relevant to whatever age group you are working with. It is not just a childhood or a children's issue, it is much, much broader than that. So this is a big complex slide, I suppose, trying to set the context and keep us as a project in mind of what we need to adhere to and what we're being governed by. The programme for government as a kind of firm draft is still very useful for us to keep that in mind. All the different strategies as well under that, the children and young people strategy with those high level aims of what we want for every child in our society, that they're happy and well and safe and have hope and have opportunities to achieve. Also linking in, very relevant for my colleague working in justice, the family strategy from the Department of Justice, where, you know, we're looking at the connections that people need in terms of, you know, if someone ends up in prison, that they still need that link with families, and it's actually better outcomes for both people who are in prison, but also the families left in the community, that you know, there is a clear connection under that strategy. Poverty, I'm going to talk about as an ACE, as an ongoing wicked problem, I suppose you talk about that in kind of inverted commas. And also our mental health framework, we have a new commissioner, you know, we have a Protect Life strategy, and this is all relevant in terms of adversity. Sometimes the adversity people experience as children, or the trauma they experience perhaps later in life, may make them feel very despairing of their situation. So all those strategies inform us. I suppose we're the last project in work stream 4, and at this stage in the project we're looking at how we change the system, how we support the systems to change. We're constantly looking back at our evidence base and our research base. We're trying to influence governments and departments, and we have a continuous commitment to workforce development and organisational development. And to some extent, we're at a stage in the project where we have handed that over to your organisations. So most of you will be very familiar with the ITP, the Early Intervention Transformation monies. So coming from Atlantic Philanthropies and through the Department of Health. So we were the last project in these monies, and we were the only one in workstream 4 which focuses upon workforce development. So we didn't have a role to look at raising awareness for the general public. That was not our focus. Our focus was the workforce, people like yourselves. We thought our funding was going to end last March, but we then got an extension. So currently we're funded with a little bit more money from EITP, some from the Department of Health, and some from the Tackling Paramilitarism programme. And we are hoping we may get some funding to continue on beyond March 21, but I think that will be a different setup, I think, in terms of the project, and certainly fewer workers as well. So where we're at, we're really in phase 3 of this project. We started back, our project manager, Helen, was in place before that, but we as implementation managers and the project manager were in place in October 2018. So it's been quite a fast pace, of course, hampered over the last while, as all our working situations have been, but it's been quite a rapid development. So we're in phase 3 now. We've done a lot of building up resources, but we still have these fundamental aims that to raise awareness about adverse experiences and where they may cause trauma in a child's life. Not always, but they might do. And that there is this duty to intervene preventatively if we possibly can. We also need to have some understanding about how these adversities can impact on a child's development and how they may cause trauma and how that may be manifested in a child or indeed in an adult's behaviour. And we need to identify what creates resilience. You know, resilience is a much more complex and fluid term, I think, than sometimes we give, we recognise. And we need to, and we're particularly at this stage of the project, we're really supporting organisations to embed policies and practice, embedding trauma-informed practice into work so that the outcomes for service users can be improved. And like I was saying before, this is a journey. This is not something that happens overnight. You can't do a training session and say, oh, I'm trauma-informed. It is much more gradual and a building up of many, many layers. Workforce development is part of that, but it is only part of that. And lastly, I suppose we're supporting organisations using particular models, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, to transform systems to become more trauma sensitive, and both internally within an organisation, but also in those intercepts. And certainly in our worlds of social work and social care, we intercept with many, many agencies, and that's really sometimes where the crunch comes in terms of so I suppose we're kind of aiming for all organisations to have some kind of consistency of approach, shared language, shared understanding to an extent, depending on the role. So in terms of the project and where we're at the moment, this pyramid is trying to kind of show what some of what the previous slides have done as well. So we've developed resources, we have level 1 and level 2 resources, and we have trained 340 plus trainers across the region. So maybe you are one of those trainers. If so, we really want to support you, and we really want you to be out delivering this training. And obviously it probably will be in a virtual way at this point. Some people are very much part of whole systems of set of trainers. Some people, might be on their own. So it's, I suppose, linking back with the project and seeing are there people you can link up with and other organisations. But sustainability, I mean, as trainers, that's a really key part of this sustainability. We were always going to be a short-term project, so we always needed to think, well, we need to build up resources that will exist way beyond the life of the project. I suppose also we need to think about the wider context as well, and the kind of not just the Northern Irish context, but the national and the international context. And oh, I think I might have frozen there, so apologies for that. Hopefully you'll catch up. The special interest group is a 5-nation strong group. And my manager would be part of that. So England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, all looking at how they want to advance. And we are part of a whole international scheme.
Sheina, we can still hear you even though we can't see you. So
that's all right, because my screen appears to have frozen as well. So apologies.
No worries. I think everybody can hear you okay.
Right, okay. Hopefully the images will start to catch up again. Also, just in terms of, if you're still seeing this pyramid screen, we're looking at using models to help organisations develop their strategies and develop a strategic response to and way to develop their organisations as trauma sensitive organisations and trauma informed. And these models are called the sequential intercept model and the universal service delivery model. Some people have heard of the latter, especially maybe in mental health. But the sequential intercept is basically where organisations connect together, and where sometimes we're sharing. We are providing services to the same people. Apologies, my screen has frozen and I cannot move on to the next slide at this point. But what I'm going to do once I start to be able to move this on again is give you some sense of the resources that we have developed in terms of raising awareness about adverse childhood experiences and where the evidence base for that is. In addition, then I'll move on to looking at our level 2, which is this developing trauma sensitive approaches, but I also want to look at the systems change. So I'm a bit frustrated here in terms of everything has frozen, and I don't know, Paul, can you still hear?
Sheina,
Yeah.
if you want to stop sharing your screen, if you can.
I can't actually do that because everything has frozen.
Let me see if I can.
Can you?
The joys of the digital world, eh?
Yes. Right, I'm going to stop your sharing, okay?
Yes, do that, yeah. Apologies, folks.
We will put the presentation up.
Hopefully that'll come. No, it's not working.
If I escape from this and then start again, would that be an idea?
Yeah, it's worth a try.
Yes, we'll try anything.
At this point, nothing is working. No, I can't escape from this.
Sheina, I'm wondering if you leave the meeting and come back in again, might that help?
I can't actually do anything at the moment, but I could.
Oh, you're back on, Sheina. You're back. Your video is back on at least.
Oh,
so
yes, something's
try it
happening
again now.
Right, okay, there we
Yeah.
go.
Fantastic.
If you want to start sharing your screen again, and then we'll go back to the pyramid slide.
Yes. I did have a rough idea where it was anyway, so I need to go back to share screen. Apologies, folks. I don't know if that's my end. Right. Are we back? Back again, folks?
Yes, we are.
Apologies. It may have been my end. I had to negotiate with all my young adults in this house that nobody was online, but we'll see. Anyway, so yes, so I'll move on now. And so this slide is just the front page of our basic level 1 training. Some of you may be trainers, so you're very familiar with this, or you may have experienced some training, and if not, I hope you will soon if it meets your needs. We've developed level 1 resource, which really is about adverse childhood experiences and raising awareness of the impact that possibly can have. While we were kind of forming as a project, Queen's University Belfast did an evidence review, and all of these resources, not the training resources, because you have to be a trainer to have these, but everything else is available on the Safeguarding Board website. And actually we also have pages on NISC learning pages, which is on the reference Paul talked about earlier. Queen's did an evidence review, pulling together all the international studies, and some of you will be very familiar with the original ACE study, which was the Anda and Felitti study way back in '98. They were medics working in health centres, and they started to realise that there was a very strong correlation between the number of childhood adversities experienced and a range of negative health outcomes in adult life. So this is very much, ACEs are a lifespan issue. Since that study, and there's many critiques of the study as well, and I really recommend you look at that. But I think our approach is, I'm comfortable with our approach, because I think and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But through the Queen's Evidence Review, I suppose they kind of shifted our focus, looking at what is happening in Wales, led by Professor Bellis here. So Public Health Wales got a huge amount of money, and Mark Bellis had a whole research team surrounding him. So his definitions, we feel we can identify a bit closer with Wales. They're only across the water there. They have some of the same issues in terms of socioeconomic issues, poverty, deprivation. Of course, they don't have our history and our legacy of the troubles and the conflict and the impact that has had on many communities, on generally our mental health statistics. So I think we've always got to take that Bellis's views and the Public Health Wales research with an element of salt, I suppose. But the definition, adverse childhood experiences or stressful experiences happen before someone is 18, that they directly harm a child or they affect the environment in which they live. And I think we're all familiar that with whatever age group you work with, we're all aware with what may constitute an adverse childhood experience. We have developed an ACE animation. I'm not going to show you that Other countries' animations are available too, but of course we try to make ours different from the Scottish one and from the Welsh one in terms of making it more specific and looking at our particular context, setting it in a school, looking at a teenager more than a younger child. So they're all available, and some of you will have seen them and possibly seen that video several times. It provides basic information, and I think that's, you know, it serves its purpose in that way, but it does have a particular approach. I suppose that this slide here, which is from another American study by Ellis and Dietz, I think in some ways this sums up the project very nicely, because it brings out all those elements which I think we have to pay attention to. And it's Ellis and Dietz actually were created this illustration as part of a building community resilience toolkit. So they're very much along the realms of community development and looking at adversity, but setting it in a community context. And that's where I think this is far better than just those maybe initial ACEs studies. It's not about kind of necessarily checklists and ticking off lists. That, I think, as professionals, we need to have that in mind, but we need to be informed by the socioeconomic issues, by the community issues as well. And the community issues, Ellis and Dietz described as adverse community environments. We know that we have communities who experienced constant wearing down of people's resilience, communities' resilience, due to poverty, due to discrimination, whatever that discrimination is, whether it's sectarian or whether it's race or whether it's homophobic or whatever, or gender. So we need to put the ACEs that children and young people and adults and families are experiencing in a community context. And if people as individuals or families are experiencing some of these adversities around the top of the tree there, also what are they living in and what are they trying to nurture and grow their children in? And are the very roots of this tree weakened? Is the soil itself toxic and actually very damaging to those individuals, those families, those communities? So even just lack of opportunity, lack of economic mobility and social capital is undermines people's resilience in that very enduring and grinding way, and living in poor housing. So I think this is a very rounded and holistic and really looking at the whole aspect of adversity. And the impact it can have. This would be from, coming from the original studies as well. And these, these are very kind of quite, this pyramid or triangles is kind of quite a shocking thing in terms of where the impact of adversities can influence health and well-being. And that idea in those very early years of child development where their neurodevelopment can be interrupted or disrupted in some way, which may lead to difficulties in terms of managing, going to playgroup, going to school, coping with other difficulties that come along. And then the adoption of health risking behaviours. What do people do? What do children and young people engage in? What do adults engage in that we all do to an extent that may harm us, and then will have an impact on our health, and ultimately may lead to disease and disability and early death as well. So some of the ACEs stuff, and that would be the critique of it as well, that it's feels like it's very labelling, it's very damning, but I think the tree with the pair of ACEs is more about saying, well, there are political and there are socioeconomic reasons for this. This is not about individuals' failures or trajectories, that we if we can intervene effectively, we can change people's trajectories. Professor Bellis then came to Northern Ireland again. Well, actually he didn't come. It was the beginning of lockdown, and he connected virtually to our annual ACEs conference in March 2020, and he'd updated his statistics and figures looking at the Northern Irish economy and the impact of ACEs on the fiscal purse. So this was his approximation of where he felt that the cost was. And this is the financial obligation that we have to intervene early in terms of ACEs, but also, we also have that moral issue. But we do sometimes need to make that financial argument as well. Finances and poverty is such a huge issue. It's almost like sometimes we forget that it's there in terms of our work, but we really mustn't. And I suppose the anti-poverty practice framework for Northern Ireland, for social work in Northern Ireland, and the Department for Communities are working on the anti-poverty framework as well in a broader sense. We need to acknowledge poverty, and it has become the wallpaper of social work practice. And I like this quote from McCartan and Morris, it's too big to tackle, but too familiar to notice. We almost pass over it and we don't notice it is there. So we cannot ignore it particularly in our world, and we need to recognise the stress that it causes people and the enduring and grinding stress and the impact that it has. And this leads us on to stress, which can come from poverty, but can come from a range of adversities in childhood or difficulties in adulthood as well. And we know what stress is. We all are familiar with stress, and stresses actually can be useful for us. I'm certainly experiencing a little bit of stress, and when my screen froze, a higher level of stress, I would say. But that is nothing compared to what many of you and many of our colleagues in the health service have been experiencing at this point, and families are experiencing through the COVID and the impact of COVID and the lockdown and the restrictions, and and having to care for people, but yes, in these difficult circumstances. So I think we're very familiar with stress. But it's very important that we do recognise how it impacts on us as individuals, and recognise that there's different kinds of stress. A bit of adrenaline when you're doing a presentation like this is really important, and it can help us if we're in a situation where we're having to think quickly. It's really a positive thing. So we have positive stress, we have tolerable stress, but what we really want to avoid is this toxic stress. And this is what we realise, that ACEs can produce a toxic reaction, especially in children's bodies. So I'm going to show you this little clip from the Harvard Centre for the Developing Child. It's a great website. Hopefully you will hear it well. I will open up the screen and just let it play. It's short.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
So just a wee clip from a video that I find informative and just reminds us about why we want to avoid toxic stress, why we need to intervene early in children's lives, and how that's basic response to people, you know, holding a child can calm responses down. Even if it is a virtual meeting that you're having, or you're calling someone, that, you know, holding them with your voice, with your attention, can calm systems down. And we are often doing that in our roles. But obviously we're working in exceptional times as well, and we're adding COVID into the mix of maybe people experiencing poverty, discrimination, living in poor housing, feeling afraid in terms of their communities, or not feeling supported. And I suppose initially there was a lot of talk about COVID being an equaliser, but we know absolutely that is not true, that COVID is disproportionately impacting on people, and often people we are working with in social work and social care. And those would be people who have existing health problems, older, frailer people, people living in poverty, people from minority ethnic groups as well. So you know, we know that the stress of COVID is impacting some more than others. In our second resource, I suppose, that we've developed, which builds on level 1. So for some people, level 1 might be enough to do the training, but level 2 is more then moving on to the skills aspect of it and the organisational side of it. So this resource is called Developing Trauma Sensitive Approach to Practice. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey. We're very careful about our wording. And I suppose talking to people like Karen Tradesman as well, who's saying, you know, we can't say we're trauma informed after a couple of hours of training. It is a much more in-depth and layered and nuanced approach to systems, really, as well. So we need to kind of take that on board. So in our level 2, we go more into looking at trauma, because we need to acknowledge adverse childhood experiences do not always cause trauma in people. That, you know, even if there's multiple adversities, there may be equally multiple mitigating circumstances or mitigating factors in a child or an adult's life. What in level 2, I suppose, we look at actually when we're working with people who are exhibiting signs that they may well have been traumatized. So we use the SAMHSA definition. There's many other definitions of trauma, but they're all quite similar. And the SAMHSA is useful for us. And this was an organisation that was highlighted for us in our Queen's Review. So it's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Support Agency. It's an American government body who pull together best practice from across the states and internationally. So they're very kind of reliable. It's a good website to look at, and they give structures, and you'll see I refer to them again later on as well. So SAMHSA's definitions look at, you know, the 3 E's, I suppose, they talk about. There's multiple, you know, acronyms and multiple letters, but trauma could come from a single event. It could be a one-off event in a child's life or an adult's life. It could be a series of events, multiple ACEs, or it could be circumstances. So it could be, you know, living in a home and there's a lot of violence or domestic abuse, living with parents who have very severe ongoing mental health issues. It could be living in a war zone. It could be living in a situation which is very tense, and there's a lot of scary things happening out in the street or in the community. And indeed looking at our own history, what some of the people we're working with, what they have lived through, or even what their parents or their grandparents have lived through, you know, it can cause trauma and may impact throughout the generations as well. So that definition is useful. And I suppose essentially when we're looking at developing trauma sensitive practice, the essence of it is that we look at people and we look at situations and we look at communities and we look at society through a trauma lens. And we need to give credit to Bernardo's in Wales, who kind of developed this, and we kind of liked this acronym, and then we kind of moved with it. And I suppose it's not, you know, it's been used in many settings, but this idea of looking at someone through a trauma-informed lens is the fundamental shift. Is, oh, you know, it's not why are you behaving like this, it's what has happened. You know, and trying to understand someone through their behaviour, which may be extremely difficult behaviour, could be aggressive, could be challenging. But the trauma lens shifts our focus, so we're reflecting a bit more. Some of you will do this automatically, you know, and it's part of your training, and you kind of taught to do this. But a lot of people are finding this quite useful as a very simple tool, just to remind them to pause and stop and think and reflect and question themselves. It's not necessarily a questioning the person in front of you. In fact, sometimes that's important not to do. So the lens, you know, encourages us to look around the environment, to explore in our heads, talk to colleagues, think about safety. Is this person feeling safe? Am I feeling safe? Because that might be significant as well. You know, and I suppose safety is a big factor at this moment in terms of our health as well. But then thinking about what what does this person need? And if it's a crisis situation, they may need really basic stuff. They might need a blanket around them. They might need to be told where the toilet is. They might need to be given a glass of water. And, you know, and that's the same. Sometimes we forget those really basic things when we're talking to, but it, you know, reflects Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then the S of the lens is just saying, well, am I the right person to help? Or do I need to signpost to someone else? And indeed, is this a safeguarding issue, whether it's a child or an adult? So this, you know, ACEs in some ways is broader than child protection. Certainly it's much broader than that, but sometimes, you know, it will have to sit alongside and it must sit alongside our safeguarding policies and procedures, and we need to adhere to them if we think it is a safeguarding matter. So I suppose the 4 R's then is coming again from Sandra, and Karen Treisman uses a version of this, and we've kind of adapted from both of that. And these 4 R's would summarise what we want to people to achieve in terms of their practice and in terms of our systems as well. So they basically summarise how a trauma-informed organisation delivers its service. It's the practical application of understanding about ACEs and about trauma. So everyone in the organisation, not just people in social care and social work, but everybody, including support staff and including, you know, the practical staff, the technicians, the receptionists, the cleaners, you know, everybody has some understanding of this, because we want our whole organisation to be trauma sensitive at least. So the 4 R's kind of recognise that we need to realise how much ACEs can impact on people. We need to recognise it when we're working with someone, and recognise it in our colleagues and in ourselves. We need to have a commitment, and that is both as an individual worker and as a team and as a service and as an organisation, that we try as best as we can to resist re-traumatising people who have already been traumatized. And we know that some of our systems unfortunately do that. With the best will of in the world, we recognize this. But there will always be actions that have to be taken for people's safety, to protect a child, you know, which will be extremely difficult and challenging. But then how do we do that? And that is where we can minimize or bring down some of that re-traumatizing impact, hopefully. And then our response. How does our system respond? How do we as workers respond? But how does our system respond to people who've experienced trauma? Can we say at every stage, you know, that every aspect of our service delivery is trauma responsive, you know? And some of you will be practicing in that way. And then I suppose it's then, how can you, if you already know a lot about this, how can you connect with other teams, with other practitioners, with other services, with other programs, and share that skill and knowledge so that it can dissipate throughout the organisation. So because it is not just about specialist services, this is for general services as well. And our project has always had that very broad remit. We are not about the specific therapeutic services, we're scaffolding up to those specific therapeutic services. So the 4 R's I've already mentioned, and they're in the middle of this diagram, and this has come from Samsa. And Samsa also very helpfully outlines these 6 principles that demonstrate, or that an organisation needs to consider and address if they want to become trauma informed. And you will see that these reflect a lot of our regional health and social care values as well. And they may well, if you're in the community and voluntary sector or different organisations, they may well reflect your value system your organisation as well, because they're very general and but they're really important in terms of developing a trauma-informed approach to services and to care delivery. So safety, and that's safety for absolutely everybody. It's for safety for the service users, clients, or whatever word you use, but it's also about safety for staff. And if you think in terms of COVID, how do people feel safe in terms of their own health? Have they got appropriate gear? But also, you know, there's a physical safety, but also there's a psychological safety, and sometimes we don't get that right. There's something about our settings or the responses that triggers people's alarm bells and makes them feel very at risk or scared. Trustworthiness and transparency, and we're all aiming for that we continue to work like this throughout at every aspect. And we have a way to go, as we know, in terms of our systems and our databases and our shifting systems in terms of health and social care, and in the community and voluntary, and indeed some of the private sector as well. We need to think about peer support. How can we both, when we're workers, support our peers and work together, but also then how do we encourage service users to gain support from each other? And I suppose models like the Recovery College model, which is very much about lived experiences and sharing experiences, and how we can learn, how we can gain support from each other where we've had some kind of shared experience, whether that's mental health issues or whether that's being a parent or whatever. Collaboration and mutuality as well, that there's a respect, that there's an openness with the people we're working with, that we can collaborate and work together, and that's across agencies and organisations and with people who we're providing services for. The empowerment, voice and choice, that we really hear people with lived experiences. How do we really meaningfully do that? There are many kind of strategies and public-private involvement, but do we, is that trauma informed? Is that trauma sensitive? How can we enhance that? And we also need to take on board culture, whether it's the culture of the individual you're working with, whether it's our own culture as an organisation, and organisations do have cultures, indeed teams of cultures. We need to look at the history of the person we're working with, but our own history and our Northern Irish history, but also the history of, for example, the position of women in society, or how the history of how children have been treated and how teenagers are viewed, and certainly kind of gender issues, people with disabilities issues, all those kind of things. So these principles are really broad, and if we can address these, we're going some very strong way to becoming trauma sensitive and eventually trauma informed organisations. The safety factor then is linked with this, and this we would look at this in part of our training. I would say you are all very familiar with the fight or flight response, but there's more complexity to that in terms of responding to a situation that makes us feel unsafe, and that can be because of systems, or it can be because of an individual, or a particular, even a smell, or a look of a place, or someone looking like someone else who's frightened them in the past. So we kind of need to understand how the neurological, the brain's reaction to threat, and that there are both active and passive responses. And some of these responses, like freezing and flopping, or even befriending, are not acquiescing. They are not saying, yes, this is okay, you can hurt me or you can harm me. They are the brain's very clever responses, really instantaneously say, how am I going to survive this particular situation? So it may be about agreeing to do whatever, but it is so we need to understand some of this, and we look at this in our developing trauma sensitive our level 2 training as well. So a bit about the neuroscience is really helpful, and understanding a bit more without being blinded by it. I mean, some of you may be psychology trained, or that background, or medically trained, or whatever. I'm not, so a lot of my learning in terms of neuroscience has come through being a Solihull approach trainer and learning a lot about infant brain development in those first 1,000 days. But some of this is very useful for us. This slide is adapted from Dan Siegel. He's got great, you know, if you look him up on YouTube, maybe you're familiar with some of his writing. He's a psychotherapist and a psychologist, and he does some really useful stuff, both working with adults and with children indeed. So we need to know that the brain forms kind of from the bottom up, from the stem cell up, and from the back to the front in a very basic way. It's a bit more complex than my understanding of this, but this slide helps that. And I suppose that the brain stem, and this is the part which is developed when a baby is born. It's about surviving, it's about breathing, it's about temperature, it's about being able to suck if you're a baby, you know, it's a, you know, very basic stuff. And some people sometimes when they've been traumatized can revert back to this really frightened stage, a very basic stage. So we need to recognize signs and symptoms of that in the people we're working with, and need to make sure that we're working on, well, how can we make this person feel safe? Because they cannot engage with us on an emotional level, and certainly not on a thinking level, unless they feel safe. So this is fundamental, and this is fundamental to us as workers. If we feel unsafe, we cannot work effectively, you know, and we can't think and we can't logically process what's going on. The limbic system then is deep in the middle of the brain, and it's the seat where, you know, it's where memories are stored and attachments are formed, and it's basically concerned with, am I loved? Am I lovable? Can, you know, am I okay? Does the world think I'm okay? Do my parents think am I okay? Do my parents and my carers think am I okay? And I suppose once you kind of calm people down and so they feel safe, you can start then to engage them at this more emotional level. So if someone's had a real fright or feeling very frightened, you know, it might mean at this stage they start shouting and getting angry, they might start crying, you know, but that means that you know, there's some kind of connection with that limbic system. And lastly, the bit, you know, just behind the forehead, and I do advise you to go and look at some of Dan Siegel's the hand model is quite useful. We use that in the Solihull approach, and we do that in our training as well. You know, the thinking bit is, you know, is trying to, through the brain stem, through the limbic system, is trying to interpret the messages that are coming to the brain, saying, well, how can I make sense of this? How can I interpret it? What can I learn? Okay, I've learned that if I react in this way, this is what my parent does, so maybe I'll try another tack, you know. So it's processing that, and this is the stage of the brain that is the last to develop in a very young child, and is not fully developed until kind of about the age of 3, and then goes through a real reorganization part in teenage years as well. I suppose the other things that are really useful in this is we'd be looking at Beacon House. Beacon House has some wonderful resources and websites and illustrations, and we would blatantly steal and beg and borrow from all sorts of people, but this is a good website to access as well, and talks about this window of tolerance. And basically, when we're in our window of tolerance, we're okay, we're doing all right, and this is the optimum time. Hopefully you're all sitting in a reasonable window of tolerance at this point, because otherwise you won't be listening, you won't be really taking in the images on the screen, because you're maybe agitated, or you're waiting for a phone call or something like that. Whereas if we're in this tolerance window, this is when we can love and learn and relax. And of course, this is incredibly important for children. And when you think about education or education system, children need to be in that window. They need to be alert. You don't want them so laid back that they're horizontal. They need to be alert, but they need to be relaxed enough so they can take in information. The problem is that sometimes we're working with children, and indeed adults, who have been pushed and triggered out of that window of tolerance, or their window of tolerance is incredibly narrow. And so sometimes we have children who have had interrupted neurodevelopment, or who have a learning disability, and a sensitivity in terms of being on the autistic spectrum, where they may be very sensitive to triggers that can very quickly push them out of that window of tolerance and into a state of either hyperarousal, so they will kick out and they'll scream and they'll shout and they'll run away, or hypoarousal, where they will shut down, where they will, can't think clearly, well, they will look really flat, they will look disengaged. And I suppose we look at this in a bit more detail in our training. If you can see this slide clearly, you will see that both being hyper and hypo, the listing of symptoms, when it comes to the bottom few, they're the same. Tummy aches, sweating, shaking, hypervigilant are both the same. The child may not look like they're hypervigilant if they are really shut down and flat, but they are extremely alert. So they're really ready to shut down, freeze, flop, or punch or lash out or run away, so that fight, flight, freeze, flop. So we kind of need to have, some of this you will know, and some of you will know in a lot more detail, but I think it helps to keep reconnecting with this and understanding this. And if it's something that's new to you, hopefully this can be learned in a reasonably straightforward way, and then you can go to further websites and further training and specialist training to develop your understanding of this. So then what do we do when we know that someone in front of us, or even this could be a whole system, this could be a whole team in a state of alarm? How do we connect the brains again? How do we get into our reflective state? How do we get into our window of tolerance? And there's basic stuff that can be done. This is not specialist stuff. This is techniques and skills that really all of us have, and certainly all of us can use. So in that, if you feel someone is in that survival state, then they're really functioning at this really frightened, very, they can't even communicate what their fear or their worry or whatever, then you need to provide warmth through your tone. You can't, it's probably not appropriate to wrap your arms around them, but maybe you could get them a blanket. I mean, this is why ambulance drivers, the first thing they do is put a blanket around someone, because they will be physically shaking as well. So the physical shaking is probably, reflecting something that is going on inside as well. So you stay close by this person, you don't confront them, kind of stay side on to them. To connect to the emotional state, then you're keeping that safety, you're trying to build up that safety, you're then trying to build a relationship with them, and you're starting to say, I think you're really worried about this, or you're using terms that might help them, and you're sitting alongside them. And we have resources that my colleague Joe's developed that are leaflets, and you'll see them on the Safeguarding Board website, and some of you might have they're really lovely leaflets. But we've run out of them, so you might need to just print out one, which won't be quite the same, but they give a lot more detail to these techniques. Then when you're trying to engage someone in that thinking brain, when you're trying to put problems or issues into kind of bite-sized chunks, and you're maybe starting to, you're not telling people what to do, but you're saying things like, I'm wondering if you're feeling very worried about this, or you're wondering, you're concerned about that, and we're using our skills there in terms of what we know about this person, what we know about life, how we understand and how we interpret the environment that we're in with this person, so we're giving an educated guess and a skillful guess, and maybe base that on our professional development as well. And for children, it's quite good to give children very short, clear instructions. Might also give them, might be good that they drink something or they chew on something, because that helps that calming down as well, and engaging the thinking brain. So in that training, we kind of give a little bit of this neuroscience in a straightforward way. And you'll see, for those of you who have more sophisticated understanding of this is scaffolding up to very therapeutic structures. We're scaffolding people's skills up to, and we think that this is things that everybody in the organisation needs a little bit of understanding about these factors. So hopefully that gives you a sense of our training. What I'm going to move on to now is resilience, this term resilience, and its ranging complexity as well. So resilience is incredibly, it's a term that is used a lot in social work and social care. It can be misinterpreted, can be misguided, I suppose, as well. We need to look at the research. This slide is from Welsh research, but it reflects many studies on resilience. And we know that these 4 factors are often building blocks of resilience. And that is both in people we work with, but also in ourselves as workers and working in very difficult situations and with people who've experienced trauma. We need to care for our own resilience and nurture that as well. So obviously children ideally have one or more stable caring child-adult relationships, someone who can help them manage their emotions, so and help, like a little toddler, managing and naming emotions. And like Dan Siegel says, even if you can name I'm feeling angry, there's something about controlling that just by recognizing the emotion of anger or of love or of worry or anxiety or whatever it is. So being equipped to manage behaviours and emotions often comes from that stable, caring adult-child relationship. Hopefully children get that from parents, but obviously we're often working with people who may not have got that from parents, so it might be you who's a stable, caring relationship, and they need to be available as well. Parents might be physically available, but they might not be emotionally available, depending on what's going on for them. The other important parts of resilience is that feeling of some kind of control, of guiding, being able to overcome adversity or hardship, and guiding our destiny. So some people who have experienced many adversities in their childhood, they have said, but this is what I got out of this situation through pushing myself physically. I became really able in terms of acquiring skills, maybe in a sport or some kind of ability like that, or developing a skill in terms of something practical or something intellectual. And other people, control that through education, through saying, well, yeah, home's really difficult, but school's okay, and school, and for those children who are having to be at home, that can be extremely difficult in terms of that outlet that they find through education, and maybe through relationships with educationalists as well, is going to be hampered by these particular situations of lockdown. And we all need to be involved and connected, whatever stage of life we're at as well. I mean, these apply throughout life, but when you think about our care homes and our elderly people and people whose parents, maybe their health deteriorated because they didn't have that regular contact with people they loved and felt attached to or felt they belonged to. So we all need that, and we need to feel that in teams and in our organizations as well. Do we feel connected to the structures in our organization? So I suppose resilience then and this slide tries to show the complexity of resilience, because I think resilience isn't something we're born with and stays static. It is something that is very much an interactive factor. It ebbs and flows depending on our stage of life, our experiences during that life. It ebbs and flows with age as well, with health, all these different factors. There may be core resilience factors we are born with. I suppose, we can't get away from maybe basic biology and physiology, and for being born at a healthy weight is probably a good starting point for physiological resilience. But things like even gender these days is not something that necessarily remains static as well. And certainly sex and sexuality may change in terms of life experience as well. But there would be some physiological traits that do remain with us, weight and race being one, I suppose, as well. But this slide tries to show how it's the interaction of these factors that affect resilience. And when it comes to it, geography, just pure geography, being wherever we are born, may be a factor that either undermines or supports our resilience as well. So when you think about people who have come to Northern Ireland seeking asylum as refugees, they have probably experienced a huge amount of adversity in their homeland. They decided to leave. The journey itself could have been extremely traumatic. And now they come into a different culture. They maybe are perceived differently. They are discriminated against because of the colour of their skin or because of their religion or whatever. So you can see how that might ebb and flow. They're also maybe, have a much smaller extended family or community structure as well. So all of these things, I mean, I think often in social work and in community work and in youth work as well, providing people who have had lots of difficulties and adversities with positive events can actually be hugely significant. And some young people will say, oh, I'll never forget that teacher or that youth worker who took me, or that social worker who took me to, you know, an activity or a holiday or, you know, a setting. And some of those memories can really be embedded in the limbic system and can really support people through difficult times at different stages in their life. So hopefully you get the sense of that ebbing and flowing and interactional aspect of both external and internal factors that affect resilience. And we need to be connected. We, you know, when you think about the new, you know, the models that we're embracing, like signs of safety, we are part of systems, whether they are small systems or big complex systems. And we need to support that both formally and informally for people who experience adversity. Also, as workers, we need to look at that. We need these connections. We need an infrastructure where when we fall sick that we know that we can access a GP. And obviously these systems are under huge stress at this point, but they are still working, you know, to an extent, you know, all these difficult decisions that policymakers have had to make about delaying operations, treatments, but hopefully we'll return to that. But I suppose compared to some nations, some countries, our systems may be a little bit stronger than others, just because we're a richer society, however much strain we're under. But we need all these different connections and formal and informal supports. And I suppose when we're thinking about community resilience as well, I mean, this again is coming back to this Alison Dietz, who designed the tree image. And I was doing an input for the social work using community development approaches, and this would be, you know, looking at the assessment of how ready is a community, is a society. Do we have the infrastructure? What needs to be built up? What needs to be worked upon? Where are the gaps? Where are the problems? Things like that. So this diagram tries to look at all the different factors, and we need to take into account adversities in communities and for individuals and families as well, and hear some of the history and the stories that some people, and the narratives of certain communities and what they've experienced. So I'm going to move on, just aware of time. As workers, I suppose we in terms of our own resilience as well, we need to realise that working with people who have had a lot of trauma and adversity can have an effect on us as workers. And I think we were knowing that. I think staff well-being has probably never been discussed quite as much as it is at this point. And was it this morning in the news or yesterday morning, talking about the mental health needs of our frontline workers, maybe particularly our nurses who are working in the COVID wards, you know, and we're thinking of them, and we're all dealing with you know, you're all dealing with different situations. So secondary trauma can be experienced by workers just, you know, because you're hearing about traumas from other people. There's a bit of overlap between definitions of secondary and vicarious trauma, but vicarious trauma is probably more significant as well. And this definition comes from the Blue Knot Foundation, an Australian organisation, which is this idea, this negative transformation that can happen in the worker, where there's an empathic engagement with trauma survivors and their stories and their narratives, but also combined with a commitment or responsibility to help that person as well. So that can take its toll, especially if we're repeatedly being, you know, exposed to this, as we often are in our roles and in many other of our colleagues' roles across the health and education and justice sectors and community and voluntary sectors as well. And the greater exposure, there may be the greater risk of that. So we need to really imbue our organisations and embed within our organisations a commitment to looking after and countering the impacts of secondary and vicarious trauma. And we need to practice self-care as well, but it's not just due to, we need to look after ourselves, but there needs to be structural care for staff as well. And we need to realise that just like stress, it can have, secondary vicarious trauma can impact on us physically, psychologically and behaviourally. So you might want to think, when we're doing the training, we ask people to think about how does it affect you, because we're all different, but it might be, for me, it might be very much about making decisions or being clear about interpreting a story and then responding to that in an appropriate way. So and making a decision about what is best to do, when you're kind of caught on the hoof like that. For other people, it will be manifested physically, or they might get, more likely to get angry or to cry indeed. So part of that, like looking at vicarious and secondary trauma, we need to, weave this through our organisations. We as staff are the resource of staff for whatever organisation you're working with. We are the main resource often in our organisations, and especially in social care and social work. And when it comes to well-being, wellness and self-care, there's many factors to that. So this wheel tries to look at all these different factors. Some of them are workplace connected and some of them are outside of that, and like looking at a kind of the system idea and the signs of safety system, if we look at that as ourselves, or we need to have relationships both within work and outside of work as well that can support us. We might need to think about spiritual well-being, whatever that means, whether it's religious or non-religious, but maybe it's a mindfulness or something like that. We need to feel that we have some sense of control, autonomy, belonging, and we're able to contribute to our teams, to our organisation. So that professional, personal development, and NISC has got a lot about those kind of self-care things as well, ideas for that, and there's lovely stuff on those learning pages of things that we can practically apply to promote our own self-care. Obviously, we need to financial stability. And we're working with people where poverty is a huge issue, and we as workers can have huge financial issues as well. So how can we get support? Can we get look out for support in that? And even when it comes to fun and engagement in our work, we may be in working with very traumatized people. There might not be much fun at the moment, but even taking time to have a coffee with our colleagues, have a laugh, connect with our family, relax, it is really useful for us and boosts our energy levels as well. So well-being leads to well-doing. It's in our organisation's interest to look after us. It should be in our own interest to look after ourselves as well, for the sake of people who love us and care for us and are involved with us. But we need it on all those different levels, on those nuanced levels within organisations. So the 4 R's again, this sums up what we try to get people to kind of get a grasp, I suppose, in terms of our practice, and really put this into this realise, recognise, resist re-traumatising and respond in a trauma-informed way. And I suppose logically, if we apply these sums of principles and the 4 R's and the principles of safety and trust, hopefully we will get these outcomes on this logic model. And this is why we are trying as a project. This is the logic behind what we are trying to achieve. We need to have recognition and awareness of ACEs and trauma. We need to enhance trauma-informed, we need to develop trauma-informed care and the competence to deliver that care in a trauma-sensitive way. We need information, we need processes and infrastructure. We need to then look at our policies and practice and our physical environments and our personal interaction. So that's what we do that is trauma sensitive. And then as a result of that, what will happen is that service users will feel safe with us with our organisations. They'll feel empowered, they feel valued, they'll believe that the organisation has their best interests at heart, which I don't think is always what is understood, and that they'll trust that the organisation or staff and the leadership will have the best interests, and there will be trust developed in all our organisations, and some organisations are much better at that and developing that trust than others. And the outcomes then will be service users engaged and satisfied with the services they have received. When it comes to staff, we'll lessen staff turnover. People will have fewer sick days, there'll be less burnout. We will retain. If we recruit our staff well, we will also then retain them, and we'll basically have better health and wellness. So this is coming from Trauma Informed Oregon. It's a great website as well if you're looking at system change. And we had Mandy Davis, who's a professor and leads this organisation, over speaking at our annual conference. So this is a journey we are on, and this is what this is trying to say, that we don't become trauma informed overnight. We need to build this up. For some organisations, you will be much further down this line than others. But we can all, we need to bring all of our staff up to the same level. So it's about developing trauma awareness, developing trauma sensitivity, looking at what it means to be trauma responsive. And then, for gaining that, we may become trauma informed at every level of our system. Even if we get there and think, look at that, we've achieved all this, it's the end of 3 or 5 years journey and look where we are, but we need to keep assessing this and reviewing it. If you think about the current pandemic, how that has impacted on systems, and actually it might have enhanced some of those systems, but it has certainly put in other parts of the system hugely under pressure. So there's constantly things and situations and crises that will require us to review and change. So I'm coming to the end of my presentation. These last few slides are really about resources that I want you to be aware of. Remember the learning pages as well on NISC, but some of the NISC learning pages about ACEs and impact across the lifespan will link back to some of these as well. There are also online learning modules. Face-to-face training is obviously not happening at all at the moment, so there's lots of virtual and online training. But there are online modules which are quite short. So any of you in a strategy organisation, you can just log in, and you may already have an account, but also you can contact our project if you're in an organisation outside of those strategy organisations and access the introductory level 1 ACE awareness and the introductory level 2. The ACE animations on YouTube, all the resources are on the Safeguarding website as well. And for those of you who are interested, that we have purchased the Understanding Trauma, which the Solihull approach. So it goes into a lot more of the theory and a lot more depth, but it might be something that you might find more useful. You log in, it's free, and it will be free until I think October this year. So go in and register, even if you do it in bits. It's quite lengthy and it's much more detailed. I think it would take you probably about 4 hours to complete this, so it's in much more depth. But hopefully, it might be something you can keep dipping in and out of. And once you've set up the account, you can keep using it, I think, beyond our purchase of the license. We've trained some of you as trainers, maybe some of you, and if you are a trainer and you haven't been in touch and you haven't received our newsletter, please give us a call, because you are a very important resource to us. These are other things you can access. The Integrating Family. I think somebody was trying to say something, but you maybe could put the question on the chat. These resources then are all available on the Safeguarding Board website. That video there, Sarah's story, is a video we developed. We're kind of recommending to trainers not to use it at this point when you're doing virtual training, just because it has quite an impact emotionally. But any of the other resources you can access and can be so go into the Safeguarding Board website. Just a word of warning, the website is being updated. You should know it because of the safeguarding policies and procedures to access them, but the website will be developed and is being updated. So I think our project caused a huge amount of strain on it, so it's struggling a bit at this moment, but it's in the midst of being updated. So a whole lot of references for you here if you want them, and websites. So some of these are websites I would have referred to in my presentation, and some of them are just resources and research as well. So really worth looking at Karen Treisman's website, Beacon House. Many of these are really excellent, both in terms of you as a practitioner or in terms of organisational and system change. So I'm going to end there. Hopefully that timing was okay, Paul.
Perfect, Sheina. Thank you very much for the wonderful way that you articulated the presentation this morning. I certainly got a lot out of it, and I suppose the key messages for us is around, you know, the individual and as well as the organisation responsibility to be trauma informed and to be trauma informed as an organisation. I think the lens, again, is really important of how we perceive. We all know how to react to things, and I certainly the message for me in your presentation this morning is how we respond, and by looking and reframing can make such a difference for families and vulnerable young children. I want to just sort of say at this point a very warm thank you, Sheina. Sheina has presented on a number of occasions and will continue to do so, hopefully, if the need's there. We have the opportunity to have some questions this morning. We may not get through all of them. There will be an evaluation piece that will follow on later this afternoon. Hopefully Jenny will get that out to people. And in addition, there's been so many people asking for slides, so I had started to respond individually, but we will get the slides on our website, and we will have the recording, because I think it's really important that this information goes out to teams, that it's disseminated and utilised in a way that will support the work across the system. So we will endeavour to do that as soon as we can get physically doing so. So at this stage, Sheina, are you okay and to take some questions?
Yes, yeah. The last minutes.
Has anybody, I'm just looking back to see if any questions came through there on the chat. It moves so quickly, this chat. I'm happy. Anybody want to raise any issues or questions with Sheina? There's so many people on this morning, so if you could just use your chat to say, and then I'll pick up with you. If not, that's fine. I know people are really busy. Yeah, no questions. That's fine. Any further information you can contact through the reference or through Sheina. So we're very happy to support that. So look, hopefully we'll end now, and I hope everybody remains safe and get back out there. We're very busy at the minute, everybody. So thank you very much for taking the time in your busy schedules this morning. And
Paul, there's a question from Thomas Morrison.
Oh, Thomas.
Yes, he's asking, I was wondering if the signs of trauma can vary much between individuals.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, I'm not an in my understanding of trauma is it can be really different, you know, and I suppose looking at the slide, the response to threat can show how one person could freeze, so it could look like they are coping, but actually they are, you know, just as traumatized inside as the person who's yelling at you or running out the door. So I think, and I think often the same person can react in different ways to trauma as well, and it may be connected to learned behaviour as well. So a young child could have learned that the safest way in the house to deal with adversities is to freeze. And if any of you have worked with kind of really flat or passive babies, that is a very worrying sign. The child.
I think we've lost you, Sheina.
I thought it was me.
You okay?
Oh, it looks like we've.
Yeah. Look.
I know that there's been serious internet problems this morning.
Okay.
Across various different networks.
I think I know everybody is under pressure here this morning. Look, if there's any additional questions that people have, if you want to include them in the chat, we can follow up with Sheina and she'll come back to you. It's quite a lot of people on this morning, so sometimes that impacts in the digital piece.
Sorry, I froze there, I think.
Oh, you're back?
You're back.
Yeah, back now.
Okay. Do you want to finish that piece, Sheina, or are you?
Oh, she's gone again.
Okay. I think we'll end.
Sorry, it seemed to be freezing a lot.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, just either email myself. You've all got my email address, and I can pass them on to Sheina if you don't get them through chats or whatever.
Yes, I'd be very welcome for that. Sorry, I seem to be freezing there a few times. So I'm not sure if you heard my response to that question, but yeah, the contact details are on the slides there. So and please access our website as well. Be very welcome to that.
Absolutely. Look, thank you again, Sheina, and thank you for everybody tuning in this morning. There are seminars that are also up and coming, so check in with our website for those as well. So all the best. We'll sign off now. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thank you. Bye.